Carl, welcome back. How are you doing?
Very well. Nice to be back as ever.
Yeah, no, nice to see you, especially with all of the extraordinary change that we're seeing in governance and AI and geopolitics. Um, and I reached out because I saw one of your fascinating posts recently on LinkedIn about AI, myth and disinformation, information warfare, and kind of can we trust the nature of reality as mediated through a digital lens, whatever that lens ends up being. Um, and you kindly said yes to coming on the show. So before we dive into all of that, I want to start with the opening question. At this moment in time, we're recording towards the end of Feb. What do you sense or suspect might be going on in the global human psyche if we play with that as a metaphor?
What's going on in the global human psyche? My gosh,
Mm.
Nathy, I cannot tell you how many podcasts I've been on in my life or questions been asked of others, and I've never been asked this one before. This is truly novel.
Excellent. Glad I can keep surprising you.
I think like yeah, I think we're living in an age which is extremely anxious and nervous, quite lonely, and less and less able to peer into the future, aren't we? I think we're kind of having to deal with this. It's kind of an age which is kind of being lit alight with this kind of electrical crackling sense of forward momentum technologically, and I think the kind of fractures and craters that's kind of creating, or at least making us feel exist when it comes to our links with each other, our relationships and society, I think are really clear. I mean, I, like you know, speak at lots of events and go to lots of events across the UK and around the world, like talking about technology and what it's doing to us. And I very, very rarely meet audiences outside of Silicon Valley that are in any way infused with much, which is a weird thing when technology is making so much more things more possible and cheaper and easier.
Yeah.
Yet, you know, the questions are always, am I on a darknet kill list? You know, do any skills matter anymore? You know, what am I going to teach my kids? And you know, is polarization going to swallow the UK and destroy our politics and send us in the same direction as the United States? You know, these are the anxieties, that kind of bundle that I see. So, and I think a lot of that is because, you know, we as humans, and I suppose we as societies and polities, have long depended on prediction and anticipation as being a really important part of what we do. You know,
Oh.
we try and like peer into the future and see what it's going to be like, and we often get that wrong. But the moments when it feels like we're less able to do that, I think, are also the moments when anxiety peaks. um World War I, World War II, they were great examples about how bad we were, really, about trying to peer in the future at those two kind of precipices of modernity. And I think we now feel like we can't see very far into the future at all again. And I think that is what it undergirds a lot of that anxiety.
Mm.
I, you know, try and predict the future via these kind of forecasting and horizon scanning kind of formal exercises quite a lot. And I remember when I was like, I began to do these when I was like maybe in my mid 20s, so kind of, you know, over 10 years ago now. And um, we would do like a kind of 2-year forecast, a 5-year forecast. Sometimes if we were feeling particularly punchy, a 10-year forecast. Nowadays, like, they often begin with the idea that we can't possibly do anything beyond 6 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's telling. And yet at the same time, so many people that I meet, especially within business conference contexts, have seemingly kind of fallen prey to this idea of, well, this is the techno-determinist future we're headed towards. My job's going to be made redundant. I have to skill up or lose out to the person next to me. There's nothing I can do about it. I have no agency. So there seems to be some certainty in some of these dystopian narratives that gets thrown into mix with all of the uncertainty. I don't know. There's something about this kind of deflation of individual agency that is present in a lot of these conversations. What could I possibly do? Is there any hope? Almost like a learned helplessness. Like if you get told enough times, you don't matter. All the things that we told you, you know, get a good degree, go and do this work, and you'll be protected. And like that script is sort of starting to stutter and stagger to a halt. And I think with it, the sense of there being anything stable to hold on to, and yet there is a certainty and things are going to get worse, which is not necessarily what's going to happen, but there seems to be this kind of bend.
Definitely. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
you know, that reduction of agency, I mean, I think people feel like they're corks being tossed around on a stormy sea, trying to stay afloat. And that reduction of agency is of course like something you feel as a kind of economic actor, but now obviously through since 2022 we feel that just as human beings. We're
Yeah.
having a whole other form of agency taken away, which is like to be able to do the things that only human beings do, like the act of creation. To make music or poetry or art, to
Mm.
make podcasts or write books. you know we're now asking, you now got to ask yourself questions about whether and in what way you can possibly contribute anything meaningful to any of those different things, to kind of lots of intellectual labor.
Mm.
Saying that, I mean, we've started on quite a dark tone. I'm not actually personally particularly or necessarily pessimistic. I mean, I've spent a lot of my kind of like professional life trying to measure and identify the kind of the dangers and the concerns with the digital age, but that doesn't mean that I think we're going to be completely swallowed up by them.
Okay, so I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned there before I move into the other questions that pertain to your sense of what's actually happening and the key trends that might not be quite as visible or audible as signals, but that you're noticing that happening perhaps under the surface of the public eye. But there is something about meaning making. And I wonder, when it comes to things like the replication of human value as it pertains to that which can be measured and remunerated economically. So the stuff that I can do that makes me useful to a business or a company or to the GDP of my country. If, and it's a big if, and I don't think we're there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but if and once potentially we get to the stage where different forms of technology can replicate the value, economic value that humans create, then maybe it's perfect point in time to have these questions around, well, what does it mean to live a life that is oriented not around the meaning of one's economic value, but the meaning of something else? So the subjective joy of being in conversation with someone, the subjective joy of engaging in poetry, becoming a parent for the first time, going for a walk, engaging in art, engaging in philosophical discussion. Like, do you think that there is a potential there for a renaissance, potentially?
Definitely a potential. And discussions around universal basic income, I think, and wealth distribution in a kind of post scarcity age is already looking at a lot of this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
there are techno optimist kind of circles have long been pointing to this as the kind of panacea that we might very conceivably be moving towards. Of course, that requires like such a fundamental rewiring of the way in which society works.
Yeah.
To imagine us kind of ably and easily moving in away from a kind of accumulative market-based capitalist society towards that is sometimes quite difficult, especially when it is
Mm.
in fact massive stacks of capital that is making that happen. Um,
Yeah.
but like they're just never and yeah, a world where we are working much less or needs to work much less is much seems much closer to our fingertips than it did 10 years ago for sure.
Oh, Carl, I hope you're like, I've been reading all this. So, all of this work about, how you read the headlines about people using AI will replace other people, not just AI systems. I've been reading some really interesting studies that have been coming out about things like cognitive surrender. So, it's the idea of kind of outsourcing all of your cognitive labor, your decision making, your critical thinking to your cognitive prosthesis, which is your favorite, large language model. And the other study that I saw that was quite interesting, I mean, there's a few that kind of look at similar things, but this idea that the amount of productivity gained by people engaging quite hastily and without really checking the output of AI is outweighed by the amount of extra time it takes people to check all of the stuff that's just been generated. So there's like an increase in bulk of stuff, an increase in work on people checking the bulk of the stuff, much of which feels coherent, but actually isn't meaningfully like advancing the task at hand. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff specific to LLMs, specific to generative AI, that seems to be like the facade is cracking a bit. And yet we know, for instance, that I think it was something like a year and a half ago that the first new antibiotic in 60 years had been discovered, largely thanks to the implementation of a particular AI tool that was able to help people discover it. So like there are real gains being made in very specific areas. It seems to be overcrowded by headlines about slop generating bollocks machines
Yeah.
and nudify apps and, child abuse image generator. Like just bullshit, basically. And it's kind of, we could do so much more if we just angled our resources towards meaningful goals. Um, I wonder what you think about that if we kind of go to the
Well, I
trends
mean,
that you're.
every revolution is surrounded with snake oil and nonsense,
Yeah, yeah,
and false start and failing companies. We remember Isaac and Brunel, and we don't remember the engineers whose bridges collapsed. And there
yeah,
were
it's
there were
true.
plenty of engineering failures during the height of Victorian kind of kind of steel based kind of ebullience. And I think we're there. We're here again. There's even people trying to make sense of AI and what it's going to do. There's going to be so much nonsense written and spoken about. On the other hand, I mean, there are trillions of dollars betting that this is a real revolution, and
Yeah.
I think it is. It has to be. And the examples that we can see sprouting and coming forth and actually maturing really quickly kind of are showing us they are like it's going to come much less, I think, from people kind of probably interfacing with free to use LLMs
Mm.
casually, and like much more through sustained like flow redevelopment, through the application of automations. Like it won't all be super sexy,
Yeah.
but it's coming. There'll be a huge shakeout, by the way, and there'll be tons of AI companies that will collapse. I think over the next year or two, there'll be a huge volume of VC money that will be lost, probably as well. But
Mm.
the economy is being reshaped. Let's be in absolutely no doubt about that.
Okay, so what are the trends potentially that you foresee over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of real progress being made by companies that are applying AI in interesting ways? And which are the trends that you think are going to pop or disappear?
Well, I'll talk about the one that actually that who on the topic who's on the LinkedIn post that you mentioned,
Yeah.
because
Oh, yeah,
you
let's dive into
you
that.
teased that to the poor listener
I'm
for
so sorry.
the
So,
last
yes,
10
tell us
minutes.
about your. Yeah,
They
yeah.
must be wondering what on earth you were talking about. But I mean, this is like it's a great example, actually, really, of firstly, how AI is being drawn into kind of the current kind of conflicts and way that societies work and compete, but then also how it's going to be used on both sides of that conflict.
Mhm.
And it is around information warfare. So I'm sure for everyone listening who has no idea who on earth I am, working on information warfare, both as a think tanker and as a technologist, is largely what I've been doing for quite a long time now. And it's information warfare might be a kind of slightly unfamiliar term to people. It's been around forever, of course. We can look at
Mm.
any conflict and kind of see people competing in information space, but it's becoming like more and more central to militaries and to societies as information both becomes more central and more ubiquitous to everyone. So it's kind of increasingly seen, and I think this was a fateful pivot that militaries conducted maybe about 10 years or so ago now. It's kind of being seen as a kind of venue of conflict.
Hmm.
So rather than being a tool of war, militaries see information as being a space in which war happens. So air, sea, land, space, and information.
Oh.
And we've seen in the wake of that kind of reconceptualization of information, a whole kind of vernacular and vocabulary grow up that is militarized.
Hmm.
So mimetic weaponry, information maneuver, information dominance, information advantage, information warfare itself. And ways of thinking about information which use military conflict as an analog. So they would kind of see attention as a form of territory, for instance.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and they would see geopolitics and geopolitical confrontation as importantly happening within the information space as like on a battlefield. Um, and so that's happening. So's hybrid warfare more generally, of which information warfare is a part. But so
Hybrid
is
warfare. So you're talking about multiple fronts of warfare.
multiple fronts, economic subterfuge, kinetic threats,
What are
um,
kinetic threats? Are you talking about like missiles and things like this?
assassinations on the streets of European cities, kidnappings,
Oh, wow.
uh, um, sabotage. There was a kind of loading, a loading bay in Leighton in East London was kind of set alight by Russian saboteurs not very long ago because it was involved in a Ukrainian relief effort.
Hmm.
Um, that's happening a lot. Basically, well, sorry, I'm trying to like avoid jargon by throwing more jargon at people, which is really annoying. But as another way of talking about it is kind of sub-threshold forms of conflict. So it's not an act of war; it wouldn't cause a state to declare war on another state, but
Yeah.
it certainly uses coercion or violence as well as incentives and ideational stuff to try and get an advantage and try and fight a war in a different way. Um, and so, like, since this has really broken out,
Hmm.
kind of liberal democracies and think tankers like me and researchers have long grappled with this problem of how do you defend our own information spaces from information warfare? We live as open societies. We love our information spaces. We create loads of them.
Hmm.
We rely on them. They're super important to form everything about us, who we are and what we love and who we love and where we live, everything, the problems we see in the world, belonging, kinship,
Hmm.
our sense of gender. Like they're all shaped by information spaces, of course, and we see, quite a lot of my job is to detect authoritarian states, their proxies, their intelligence agencies, their arm's length covert assets, basically reaching into information spaces and trying to change them in ways that they want, both in the short term and the long term. So that might be trying to interfere with the Moldovan election, or it
Hmm.
might be trying to bolster the far right in the UK. All of that happens, being conducted by states like Russia.
I have so
So
many
we need to
questions.
defend them, and AI is both being thrown into that conflict on
Yeah.
both sides. So both as a way of doing information warfare, both as a way of defending information spaces, and actually also as a target of information warfare. And that's what the piece on LinkedIn was about. Was basically me saying, don't just think of AI as being, an LLM that you can use to like generate lies. And don't even just think of it as being, a model that you can use to identify information maneuver from enemies. Also, the thing that we have to be aware of is that it's going to be targeted by states and by other forms of manipulation to change what we see and what we think. And that is the whole new front that I think is opening up in information warfare that I think is being overlooked.
So, I mean, I've got lots of questions about this. I think one of the things that I think also muddies the water somewhat is that on top of that, if you have state actors intentionally manipulating specific information spaces or information within those spaces to manipulate people towards certain outcomes, that's one thing. But then you also have people all by themselves creating, naked images of people using Nudify apps or using, I saw something the other day about creating someone digitally unrecognizable by placing an AI face over there. So it's basically it's like a voiceover, but it would be a face over. So an AI generated human that doesn't really exist. Or people who are using AI influencers to gain followers on social media. And you can see they've
Hmm.
got maybe 20 posts in 3 months. And obviously
Yeah.
that's an indicator. But so quite apart from intentional misdirection and interference from states, you've also got people by themselves creating a very noisy ecosystem of information for shits and giggles. Like, look what I
Yeah.
can create. So, like, how do we begin to understand these sorts of dynamics, risks, and how do you engage people in such a way that they perhaps become more aware of them at a sort of civic level? Is that a front that one can begin to approach this issue, or does it all have to be through the use of technologies that are used to detect AI generated interventions, threats, etc.?
I mean, you've got individuals, as you say, that are hacking together all kinds of ingenious and devious ways of doing manipulation. I mean, what that made me recall was I was in a DEF CON
Oh yeah.
um, late last year, which is this kind of massive, colourful, neon lit jamboree of hackers that happens once a year in Vegas every year. Tens of thousands more descending, and this year, well, last DEF CON they were using AI voice generation
Hmm.
to completely automatically phone up companies and do social engineering to try and extract as much information as they could. And so we were all in the crowd, and different hackers were in soundproof booths running their models
Oh
that you could listen in on as they were phoning up companies and being like, "Oh, hi, I'm working on a school project, and I just want to know whether you use any cybersecurity software and what browser you use, and so on." And some of it was succeeding. I mean, amazingly.
wow.
You've also got, by the way, companies and corporates increasingly using information operation techniques. So I think one of the kind of real lines of travel that I see is people who have learned the kind of trade of information warfare in a
Hmm.
state are now leaving and setting up their own
Going
like
private.
for-profit shops, and you see kind of corporate on corporate, you see brand and reputation increasingly being roped into information operations, you see individual reputations being targeted as well by the same techniques as well. So you've got, this is something which is going to, I hope this doesn't sound too grim for people, but carpet society. I mean, it's an idea that I think it's one of the most important and powerful ideas, this idea that information spaces are spaces that conflict happens within, that's reshaping society around us. And I think it's such a malleable idea. It can be used almost anywhere, and it is extremely useful for the people that do it. It's also obviously deeply problematic in other ways, and we don't want
Hmm.
information spaces that are militarized. So simply fighting information warfare with information warfare, I think, is probably a bad idea and probably a losing strategy if you're a liberal democracy. But
Hmm.
you see it happening everywhere. um, can we defend ourselves on the civic level? I mean, yes and no. Um, Not really, to be honest, in any kind of comprehensive way. And I don't say this to kind of sound like deliberating for people or take away people's agency, but we have to recognize that information warfare is hidden, it's deliberately hidden, and it's conducted by powerful actors that are professionally dedicated to developing and using techniques to do
Yeah.
it. And that means that, the idea, as a lot of the tech giants have been very keen to propose, that we simply kind of teach people some digital literacy,
Hmm.
and they'll be able to kind of defend themselves and make themselves resilient against this kind of warfare. I don't think is plausible. I think, this is a kind of tradecraft that is rapidly developing. I mean, every month there are new techniques. There's all manner of ways in which there are improvements being made, and there's shifts happening and tweaks and leaps forward, and trying to teach people how to spot it is really, really, really difficult, and I would say often impossible if you're just sat there in front of your computer. This is an arms
Hmm.
race. We build ways of trying to spot it, ways that I can't talk about explicitly here because as soon as we kind of reveal those detection techniques, then the adversary will do a kind of tactical adaptation and try and change. Saying that, there definitely are things that people can do. Like you can slow yourself down. You can be very careful about your information diet. You can guard against outrage, which is like very often the
Hmm.
way in which people are manipulated. So there definitely are some kind of general, I would say, like kind of heuristics that people could kind of carry around with them.
Hmm. So I'm wondering, one of the things that I thought was really interesting at the end of last year in the UK, they tried to push through digital IDs, and there was such a lot of social media noise against that, which was great to see so many people coming together from think tanks and well, thinking also about things like Big Brother Watch and Liberty and the rest of it, to individuals, influencers saying this is a really bad idea, we don't want this, and it actually got kind of quietly let go, let's say. Didn't make much in terms of headlines. But then also thinking about things like the push towards, certainly in Europe, the banning of under 16s or under 15s from social media platforms, and how that is, in many instances, likely going to include the introduction of digital IDs, which will then likely be connected to things like people's information, their bank accounts, potentially as they get older, their medical records, and all data is hackable. So I'm just kind of, you look historically, there isn't, to my knowledge, a case of data that existed that wasn't hacked if someone tried hard enough with people whose profession it is to be able to access these sorts of data pools. And so, what do you think may happen in terms of securing access to technologies, verifying the users, with the idea of digital ID being something that could help, but also potentially hinder? Where do you see that kind of through line? going?
Well, I mean, maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I think we need strong identity online. You
And
know,
what might that constitute? Like, does that also mean that it's going to be attached to all of our other information, or could that stand alone as a
I
person-owned?
think it needs to be something which is ultimately in the hands of people to use as they want.
Yeah,
But I mean, you know, the reality is that we do already have bank accounts, you know, and we
yeah,
do already, most of us have rich and sometimes like deeply private social lives online. We've got all kinds of things that already are massively significant and in many ways very private. And the underlying reason why the internet is so unbelievably difficult to enforce and why scams and spams and digital hazards of one kind or another exist so fulsomely is because uh, it's very hard to know who anyone else is on the internet.
hmm,
And one of the best ways of beginning to secure that is using strong identities. And there are plenty of case studies. I mean, if you look at Estonia, they've been using a kind of decentralized form of um, it's called the X Road, a decentralized form of kind of
hmm,
digital kind of public services for ages, which kind of unquestionably at its heart has an immutable digital identity, which everyone has, which they carry. That doesn't mean you have to create massive honeypot, you know, databases where everyone's, you know, secret sex lives is contained in a single place to be hacked. You know, we've got
yeah,
to
I'd rather
be
not.
kind of clever and intelligent about how to decentralize and defend people's identities. But I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, financial frauds like absolutely devastate lives. They
Yeah,
devastate lives up and down the UK. I mean, they're happening in at volumes which is overwhelming for the police. The police, in my view, are massively struggling to enforce the law
hmm,
online. You know, and so much of that can be got rid of if we develop a easy way for
hmm,
Halifax to prove that they're Halifax when they're talking to you.
yeah. We had a scam call from Hola Luz, which is basically a provider for electricity. And we were chatting the other day, and they asked my IBAN number. And you can't do much with an IBAN number. You can't extract money from an account. And I usually just don't answer any calls. If I don't recognize the number, I just don't pick up because I hate answering my phone. I'm just a bit of a millennial in that sense. And also, if it's important, they'll leave a message. And that's how I screen. It's like, otherwise, it rings off. But my partner was like, oh no, it might be because, anyway, I had various things going on at the time. And it took ages. They actually got to the point where they started not being able to answer questions and they asked for a specific thing. And you know, when you sort of, they ask one question and then they ask for another data point. And at a certain point, I was like, no, no, hang up. So we hung up.
Mm,
And then we search. What you should do, of course, is search the number or go direct to the website, go to the customer service number and see if it's matching the. And of course, they never call you. And they actually sent us an email back. They're like, no, we never call our clients. We would always send you an email first through a verified link. And that's easy to do. And in Spain, because so many people communicate with businesses through WhatsApp, like that's the main port of call. So in certain cultures or zones, let's say, um, the hacking becomes much, much easier because it's just assumed that someone's going to contact you through your phone. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and look, it's the. I remember interviewing Vint Cerf, who basically created the internet. He was one of the two inventors of what's called TCP/IP, which is the underlying protocol which the internet operates on. And I was interviewing him for a book I wrote many years ago, which was looking at kind of power in the digital age. And I'd just come out of being embedded in a cybercrime team in the
Oof.
police. You know, I was seeing like firsthand financial. So actually, especially, it was a romance fraud gang that
Oh,
had just devastated a bunch of very lonely, vulnerable people in the UK and
oh,
elsewhere across Europe. And one of the things they all relied on, you know, all these different scams rely on, is just that they can create a fictitious persona really, really easily. And talking to Vint about all of this, you know, he brought me back into the kind of early foundational years of the internet where it really was universities connecting with each other collegially in order to share
yeah.
data and to connect socially. And that's why at the very heart of the internet, we do have a protocol which is basically super trusting, which
Yeah.
goes like, hey, you say that you're Tim, please to connect. I'm going to just assume that you're Tim, you know, and that is, you know, the fact that they did not build basically a way of really authenticating from the very beginning, you know, whether someone is who they say they are into the internet, both has been amazing. It's obviously been one of the most successful inventions in the history of mankind, but also it's been one which I think like we can trace that route all the way up to the kind of why it's so lawless and so hard to
Mm.
enforce today. And so, I truly understand, of course, why people feel very anxious about digital identities when it comes to both surveillance and when it comes to possible government overreach.
Hmm.
But I think it is genuinely untenable that we are going to just continue
Yeah.
to have load our financial and social lives onto platforms like this where we are unable to say who anyone else is.
Well,
I just,
especially when you even extend that to agentic AI. If you can build your own agent that impersonates who you are, you give it access to your actual email, your actual bank account, your medical records, your social media accounts, and you give it a set of rules. Like, we could even start having rogue agents impersonating us. It's just, it's if we don't solve it now, I think the issue is going to mushroom.
yeah, of
No?
course. I mean, you're right. I mean, all of the actual cues that we rely on now, like, how people write, how they spell,
Yeah.
whether they sound like you or they look like you, they're gone. I mean,
Yeah.
they're gone. I mean, I was talking to a CEO the other day who had been on a call with his board where most of the other members of the board were being emulated.
On purpose.
Yeah.
I hate that. It's so depressing. So, okay, wait, hold on. But so, because I was talking about this with someone this morning who works with business leaders. Actually, she works with women business leaders, talking about hormonal differences in the cycle and when it's good for different types of decision making, brain activity, and engagement at the C-suite. Anyway, very interesting, but deeply, deeply embodied. And we are having this conversation about where AI intersects with our embodied experience of relationship, decision making, connection with the world, strategy, etc. Because it seems to me that with all of this disinformation, misinformation, being unable to trust what we see, hear, and read online, that there does seem to be a natural instinct to want to spend time with people back in a room or wherever it might be, but in a physical space to go, actually, am I speaking to Carl or not? Am I speaking to the head of this company or not? And so, do you think that we're going to see a counter trend where business decisions are made and societal decisions in person as opposed to online? Like, is there a larger shift that you're seeing happening yet, or do you think that's
I mean, you
yet
can
to come?
you can see it everywhere. I mean, on the underground in London at the moment, they're advertising in person dating again.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure, you see that
So
that
it's in the
that that's a
zeitgeist.
counter response. I mean, like,
Mhm.
you see that everywhere from schools opting out of social media all the way through to people flying across the world as they've always done for a handshake.
Yeah.
I think the big difference will be, as you said, now that we have both agentic applications of AI, but then also AI being more and more sophisticatedly ingrained within spam and scam and criminal workflows and activities. Um, Either we're going to need strong identity or people's trust will come plummeting inwards extremely quickly.
Yeah. I think that's already happening. I mean, I'm seeing some interesting. I was talking about this with someone else the other day about social media use and how so many people are just either passively using it and not actually engaging anymore, or just coming off. It's like
Yeah.
burnout, loneliness, the amount of time taken to create content that then just doesn't get served to people anymore, or that just gets lost in the AI slop kind of melee. That's, I don't know. Anyway, but I want to talk to you about some of the things that you've been engaged in. So one of the things that you're doing at Demos is this Waves project. Do you want to tell us about that? Because that's very exciting.
Well, finally a chance to sound optimistic
Grab it
rather than
with both hands, Phil.
bitter and curmudgeonly. Yes, I'd love to. So this is I'm obsessed with digital democracy. Like I have long thought that the use of technology to change the way that democracy works might really and very meaningfully re-engage people in political decision making that have felt all too distant from it. And so years ago now, I went with the BBC and I did a kind of mini documentary about V Taiwan, which is a kind of a hacker collective there who basically became Taiwan's digital democrats. Many of them
Mm,
joined government, and they were the kind of first example of, I would say, like kind of did like a digital democratic process actually being joined up into political power. So I years later now, teamed up with Demos, my think tank, to basically try and do that for the UK.
Amazing.
So I think it's the largest digital democratic experiment the UK's ever had.
Wow.
It's been we've from the very beginning very deliberately designed Waves. I'll tell you why it's called Waves in a second. To designed it with local government. So the idea is that local government kind of evokes it on a particular issue, a difficult
Mhm.
decision they have to make. The more polarized, the better. The harder to form a consensus, the better. And then Waves goes through a series of both wide and narrow deliberations
Hmm.
on different forms of technological platform to basically come up with the end answer. So first, you have this kind of very wide discussion, and we host that. So we try and get as many thousands of people involved across the local government area. The first way, the time it's been used is in Camden for reshaping adult social care,
Oh, wow.
and the idea there is to bring everyone who might really profoundly disagree with each other into a consensus seeking online platform. We used Remesh for Camden, and what consensus seeking online environments do is completely different to social media,
It's
which
like the
tends
opposite of
to
X.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. I mean, well, I mean, weirdly, actually, X does use this for the notes part, the community
Hmm.
notes part of X. But parking that, what consensus seeking tries to do is it tries to draw a kind of underlying structure for a debate and tries to like locate you within it on the basis of what you're saying and how you're
Hmm.
responding to people. So, say we were doing this for Uber regulation, Natalie, which was the first time that this was used in Taiwan. You know,
Hmm.
we might be pro and anti Uber regulation coming into the debate, but we're responding and we're talking to each other, and it kind of manages to work that out, and it manages to kind of put us in different tribes. But then consensus seeking environments use something called bridge based ranking,
Hmm.
where they try and surface the content which my tribe and your tribe might find something to like about in common.
So
So
indexing for
basically,
consensus.
yeah, and it makes consensus more visible, or
Yeah.
possible consensus more visible. So it submerges like super polarized points, proposals, ideas. It says you can't just play to your own constituency. If it's not getting some agreement across a diversity of other users, this algorithm is not interested in making it more visible.
Hmm.
But you might say something which actually people on the other side of the debate might find something to like,
Hmm.
and those are the ones that it makes more visible. And essentially, in doing so, it's pretty magical. It basically gamifies consensus. So people
Hmm.
kind of begin to realize and respond to the idea that they can't just be trying to chase their own, agreement amongst their own group. They do have to try and find consensus and new ideas for what that consensus might look like. And it completely changes the structure of the debate. It kind of submerges all these angry points of contention. And in
Hmm.
doing so, people stop talking about the same things they've disagreed with the other group about for so long, and instead start talking about all these previously hidden areas of consensus between them.
Interesting.
And time again, what it's basically demonstrated is that there are submerged points of consensus you just have to bring up to the surface. So for Uber regulation, it was all about rider safety. That's all anyone cared about, really.
Wow.
They just had different ideas about how that might be achieved.
Interesting.
And so that's what the first stage of Waves does. But it's a wave. So from the large, big discussion, we identify these points of super consensus, what most people agree to be the right kind of like principles to form a
Mhm.
decision on. And then we bring people into a much smaller group of representatively selected people into a smaller, sustained discussion. And their job is to basically honor the wider debate, take those principles and flesh them out into kind of much fuller proposals
Hmm.
for what the government should actually do. So that might be like a policy proposal, it might be a spending proposal. South Staffordshire, where we go next, it's all about where the houses need to go. So that will be proposals to do with planning and construction and
Hmm.
developer policy, maybe. Um, and then because it's a wave, that gets thrown out to a bigger discussion again to like course correct, give feedback on, give more thoughts on. So all those thousands of people that are involved in the first process re-engage, and then the final stage is for then that narrow group to, at the end of the wave, turn that into specific policy outcomes and takeaways. And in order for waves to happen, we need the local governments to basically commit to then enacting those outputs in whatever way is in their power to do, whether that's in law or regulation or through the kind of executive decision making of the councils. It's absolutely vital that this process is actually connected with meaningful political decision making for it not to be a talking shop or for it not to be a PR exercise.
So on that point then, how do governments choose from the offset which topics they will hand over to people to be able to discuss, seek consensus on the rest of it? Because I can imagine that certain hot topics that are used to use your word submerged, I like that, submerge other issues. So if you say, okay, well, let's use an inflammatory word like immigration, which often gets bandied around when there are more pressing concerns with larger impacts and causing greater suffering, such as things like climate crisis,
Yeah,
flooding of arable fields. And I don't know if you saw, there was earlier this year, it was a national security paper on ecological instability and that becoming a national security issue within 5 years in the UK. So, like, that kind of stuff doesn't really make its way into public awareness unless a lot of people promote it, talk about it. And so, and yet that's something I think that would be great for one of these kinds of waves, right? Like, this is the information you have, what do you do with it? But how do we enable people to have access to this kind of decision making on topics that they will care about, as opposed to the people who decide, well, we're going to float this one, but not that one? Does that make sense as a question?
no, it does make sense for sure. Yeah, and that I think what you're talking about there is basically agenda setting power,
Yeah,
which is super important. Um, and much
basically.
discussed within the kind of demtech world. And I think that's really getting at the kind of like different but joining nature of kind of campaigning and like the use of formal political power. Um,
Mm,
for for formal political power to be used, there has to be political will, and at the moment, that just has to mean that the leader and the cabinet and the senior officials of a local government align to say
mm,
this is an area where we think kind of a deliberative process which involves more people is going to be really helpful and useful. If we don't have that, then we're just not going to get because often these are difficult decisions that are
yeah,
being made and really important ones, and unless you do have the elected democratic members of a local government that are completely committed to ways, like the outcomes are not going to be acted on. Uh, but what those are at the moment, I think, like what's going to shape that is the kind of political pressure, it's the campaigning pressure and
mm,
advocacy that all politicians will feel will shape the environment that they can act within. Um,
mhm.
Ideally, I mean, there's quite a lot of technology that's being built that is trying to connect those two things up. So allowing people to um, both create consensus around what the questions should be and then create consensus around what the answers to those questions are. I'll be honest with you, I don't think that is remotely close to where we're going to get to in the UK yet.
What's your prognosis?
My prognosis is we're gonna inch forwards. I mean, this is really like actually doing this in local government is really
Mm,
difficult.
yeah,
It is hard to connect. It is hard to change how power works. And this is far less to do with big, huge, sweeping, revolutionary AI-based technologies, and much more to do with the kind of nitty-gritty, like daily quotidian, art of decision making in a large, complex bureaucracy.
yeah,
That those are the realities of political change, and that's the reason why most kind of democratic based kind of technology innovation is happening in the campaigning and advocacy space. But I wasn't interested in doing that with Waves,
mm,
and I was really interested in like, can we actually connect this in with politics, as it's actually wielded, and that does mean that we have to be realistic and respectful of the current democratic structures that exist, which are that you've got people that are elected that wield political power in a representative democracy on behalf of their electorate, which this kind of process has to make sense to,
yeah.
and has to align with. And so, yeah. Um, agenda setting power, I think, is something which technologically I think we could fulfill quite easily. But working out how to actually do that within a extant political system, I think that is going to be the real question.
Yeah. Right. So building on something else that you've been working on at Chasm, can you tell
Oh, by
us
the
a
way,
bit
Natalie, so
about
I've only got about 5 minutes. I've got a thing. I know we're supposed to go on to ten
That's okay.
past. I've got a thing at 4.
It's okay. We'll do
Sorry.
5 more minutes and then we'll just keep talking. So then let's use this final 5 minutes to ask you about the Sovereign AI portfolio. What is it?
Well, so this is a project that actually I'm not really sure what it is, to be honest. Let me answer in a slightly more general way.
Go
So
for it.
there's a going back to LLMs and AI and information warfare. Like,
Yeah.
if you want my prediction, like the interaction of information environments and AI and geopolitics is the punchiest, most important triarchy that is going to change how power works today. And one of the things that we badly, badly need to do is to kind of protect LLMs from deliberate attempts to manipulate them. If
Hmm.
I was a Russian information warfare operator, I would be doing nothing else other than basically trying to work out how I can change the responses that LLMs make.
Well,
And so we have to protect that. We have to, and we don't just have to protect ChatGPT and Anthropic. We've got to protect hundreds and hundreds of different models and thousands of companies, many of whom are creating products that will forge very deep emotional attachments to their users.
yeah.
Girlfriend bots, boyfriend bots, therapy bots. There's a huge usage of AI to combat loneliness,
Hmm.
to be your like creative writing assistant. All these kind of non-professional research rational, but actually emotional, and relational forms of AI. And
Hmm.
if I wanted to influence society, I would target those.
Yeah, of course.
So we're beginning, and this is what my like group of colleagues and I are doing is we're beginning a kind of process where we're trying to build, obviously using AI as well, ways of spotting that manipulation happening in the wild. How do you reverse engineer it? How
Yeah.
do you therefore detect it quickly? And when you do detect it, how can you prove, or at least begin to evidence, that it's actually affecting the model in a certain way? It's actually affecting the answers that people give. And if you can prove that, you can evidence that, how do you disrupt it? How do you start to begin to undermine its efficacy? So the weird world we're going to live in is that both of those two things, um, autocrats manipulating LLMs and us trying to defend them, are both going to become, I think, quite automated and agentic. So you're going to end up with two competing agentic AI systems crawling across the internet, basically trying to respectively manipulate or secure LLMs from that form of influence.
It just reminds me of that show, Person of Interest. There's two super AIs fighting each other for
Yeah.
domination. I mean, obviously they're sort of a bit more anthropomorphized. So let's close then. What gives you a sense of hope? Because you're working in this space, you see a lot of dark stuff all the time. You worked on the famous kill list, and a lot of your work is around securing democracy, which has been hard won. People have died in defense of it to secure it. What gives you a sense of hope amidst all of this turbulence and noise?
I'm genuinely very hopeful. I mean, I think we're going to get on top of many of these problems in the midterm, quite decisively. And that's because, democracy is an idea worth fighting for and worth sacrificing things for. That's very obvious to lots of people. And that means that, there is, people aren't just doing this. I feel like the adversary, the autocrats, they're often doing this for money. And I think the people that are defending democracy are passionate and they're more innovative and they're more creative, and they're doing this for lots of other reasons as
Mm,
well. And I think that means that just the energy and the enthusiasm from a whole ton of different people, like immediate colleagues of mine, all the way through to, people that are building other kinds of applications are very similar. I think like all of that means that we're going to out innovate our adversary. I really think we're going to. And that means that protected democracy is always going to be, I think, smarter than the people that are trying to undermine it.
I hope you're right. Well, I'm glad to know that you are on that side. Carl, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you very much, as ever.